The Emergence of Civilization, Chapter 1. Today, what we are going to do is we are going to go all the way back to the beginning of when historians and scientists figured out people began to exist. Okay? So, we are starting with what we call prehistory, right? And prehistory is just all the stuff that happened kind of before people started taking notes and writing down what actually was happening. Okay. When we look at prehistory, we are primarily looking at people who are called anthropologists. Anthropologists are people that study the remains of skeletons of hominids. Okay, so these are people that study bones. Have any of you seen the television show that used to be on called Bones? It's about Dr. Temperance Brennan. She was a forensic anthropologist. She worked with the FBI to help solve cold case murders when they only found skeletal remains of people, right? She studied bones. So because of that TV show, because it was called Bones, because I know that she was an anthropologist, that's how I remember what anthropologists study, right? They study bones. And hominids are what we call early humans. Okay? So all in all, anthropologists study bones of early people. The most famous anthropologist is a man by the name of Donald Johanson. Okay? This guy was responsible for finding the oldest known skeleton in history. The year was 1974, and he was in the desert in Ethiopia at a dig site, right? They were almost going to go home for the night, and he told his people, like, hey, let's go this way instead of this way, right? And as they're driving through the desert, all of a sudden he spots what he finds out to be a femur bone, right? Or a leg bone of a skeleton. They get out of the car, they start digging. Pretty soon, they find out that they have discovered the earliest known hominid, or the oldest person in history to ever be unburied. Okay? Through studying the pelvis, so like the pelvis size, the width, and all the other bones, and all the sciencey stuff that they do, okay, Donald Johanson found out that he had discovered a female, and he decided to name that female Lucy. Why Lucy? It's not because he loved the show I Love Lucy. That is a great show. But he decided to name her Lucy because during that night when they were uncovering the skeletal remains, they were listening to popular music from that time period. And the song that kept getting played over and over again was the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. So now we have Lucy. And if you see, this is a picture of the skeletal remains of Lucy. So this bone right here, the femur bone, is what was sticking out of the dirt that Donald found that led him to carbon date Lucy to be the oldest known human in history. Another anthropologist by the name of Mary Leakey continued to excavate historical sites throughout Africa and continued to find more and more remains of early humans that dated to the same time period. So this discovery by Donald was not a fluke, right? Mary Leakey confirmed that humans lived in this area, in this part of Africa, millions of years ago, thousands of years ago. And from that, we have a new classification of a group of people, okay? So these early people were called, whatever this word is, however you guys want to say it. I can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to attempt it, right? But basically, it's just the scientific classification, right? So if you go into your science class and you ask your science teachers, like, what is the official Latin name for a dog, right? Or for a cat, or for a type of bird, right? Different species. That's what they started doing with these early humans. They began to classify them into certain groups or certain species based on characteristics that they found. Okay, so besides the anthropologists that are studying all of these skeletal remains or all of these bones that they're digging up out of the ground, you have another group of scientists that are called archaeologists. Archaeologists study artifacts. Okay? An artifact is a thing. right? And they study these things to determine what life was like. They study the culture of the people that the anthropologists are digging up. So, just like Dr. Temperance Brennan or Dr. Bones was my anthropologist that I connect that to, the archaeologist that I always think of when I am looking at all of this is Indiana Jones. Right? You think about the Indiana Jones movies, he's wearing his man satchel, he's running through caves, dodging giant boulders, swinging on vines to find really old stuff. Okay? The academic term for that really old stuff is an artifact. I also remember that archaeologists study artifacts because they both start with the same two letters, AR. Okay, so these early humans that are emerging were what we call the first people. Okay? These first people developed over millions of years. I'm not talking like somebody snapped their fingers, right? And we went from having just animals to just all of these humans overnight. It doesn't work like that, right? Evolution doesn't work like that. Evolution is a really slow process. So over millions of years, you have more and more and more and more and more and more and more of these first people that begin to develop and emerge in the eastern part of Africa, right? Like kind of right around Ethiopia. So that's what we're talking about is this red dot. Okay, so right here. And as these people begin to develop, they begin to move, they begin to travel, they begin to migrate. Okay. And as they begin to move, they begin to transition northward. Okay? This is what we call the out of Africa theory of evolution. Right? It's that the first people began to develop in Eastern Africa, and over millions of years, they began to migrate and travel to move and populate the rest of the world outside of Africa. When we are talking about the first people or the types of humans that were able to transition out of Africa, we are talking about a classification that are called Homo sapiens, right? That's what me, you, Mr. Starr, Mr. Moran, your mom, your dad, your younger siblings, right? Anybody that you know, we're all Homo sapiens. They are the dominant branch of hominids or these first humans that survived the process of evolution. Homo sapiens means wise man, right? They were the smartest species to survive. It's like if you took all of the dogs in the world, right, and you put them through like this whole period of evolution and only one breed could survive, it'd probably be golden retrievers. I'm just saying, I'm not biased, but I'm just saying, right? They're going to be the smartest, most intelligent group. Anyways, these Homo sapiens began to spread to Asia and beyond, began to populate North and South America. And fast forward millions of years, you and I are here learning about world history today. Okay, so throughout all of our notes, we have a series of questions that we like to ask you and then have you answer just to make sure you're following along. So the first question is, what is the difference between anthropology and archaeology? Is it that anthropology studies artifacts and archaeology studies remains? Or is it that archaeology studies artifacts and anthropology studies remains? Remains is just a fancy academic term for bones. Okay? So, what's the difference? What do you think? How can we tell the two apart? Our answer is that archaeology studies artifacts and anthropology studies remains. Okay, question number 2. Where do we, when I say we, I mean like scientists and historians, okay, believe that the first humans came from? Right? Where did Donald and Mary find those first early human skeletons? Okay, was it in Africa? Was it in Asia? Or was it in Europe? Okay. It was in Africa, which leads us to the out of Africa theory of evolution, right? First humans emerged in Africa, began to travel, populate the rest of the world. Okay, so Within these early groups of people, within this group of hominids, right, you have all these different classifications. I already said we know that Homo sapiens are the dominant classification that made it to today, right? They were the smartest, they were the best, they were the top tier. They're what you and I are, right? We're Homo sapiens. We know that they existed. But what happened to all the other different types or different species of humans that existed in the early years? Well, that's what we're going to figure out. The first group that we are going to look at are the Neanderthal people. And the Neanderthals were just early Homo sapiens. They lived during what we like to call the Stone Age or the Neolithic Age. And when I think of Neanderthals, I think of your typical cavemen and women, right? How many of you have seen the Geico commercial with the caveman, right? It's so easy, a caveman could do it, right? The image that you're seeing of that quote caveman is what historians and scientists believe the Neanderthals looked like, right? So that's this guy right here. The new characteristic that scientists and historians discovered about the Neanderthal that they had not discovered with earlier versions of hominids were that they buried their dead. Okay, so they found groupings of Neanderthal peoples in an organized burial system. They weren't just scattered around randomly. Okay, they found graveyards. So what that meant is that it showed a possibility of an early form of religion. Right? There was some reason why they buried their people together. Instead of just walking along a trail and if somebody croaks, right, if somebody dies, you just leave them there like, see you later, Bob, nice to know you. No, they would collect their dead, bring them back to wherever they were going, and then bury them with everybody else. What archaeologists discovered in the graves that the anthropologists were digging up were that the Neanderthals also buried their people with various things. Okay, they buried them with tools. So here we have different stone tools that we have discovered, meat, clothing, other things that were of importance to them. So from those artifacts, we can begin to piece together what life was like for the Neanderthal people. Okay. Eventually, the Neanderthal people disappeared. Okay. Literally fell off the face of the earth. We're not really sure what happened, why it happened. All we know is that we went from having a group of early humans called Neanderthals to all of a sudden not having a group of Neanderthals, right? They kind of fall off. We can't date them to recent times. And it's just a small chunk of history. Some scientists, some historians believe that the Ice Age might have gotten too cold for them. They literally froze. Right? Nobody survived. Or what's probably more realistic is that a different species of early humans destroyed them, right? They went to war, like, who's going to be the more sophisticated humans? The Neanderthals weren't, right? Kind of all died. They all got killed. Or what's more likely to have happened is that they interbred with another type of species of early humans. So back to my kind of dog analogy, right? If any of you have a golden doodle at home or have heard of a golden doodle, that's a golden retriever and a poodle that have been combined to create a golden doodle, right? That's probably what happened with the Neanderthal people. They interbred with another group of early humans to survive and adapt to their surroundings. But the moral of the story is Neanderthal people eventually died out. We don't have them today. Okay, so from the Neanderthals, the next classification or the next group of people that anthropologists discovered were a group that were called Cro-Magnon. Okay, Cro-Magnon had better tools and weapons than the Neanderthal. They were more sophisticated. We also know more about the Cro-Magnon people because they left us actual physical paintings in caves. And they left us like murals for stories about their life, what was happening, what was going on. Archaeologists and anthropologists were able to date the paintings in these caves to the time period around this group of skeletons, and then they began to put everything together. We also know that Cro-Magnon people migrated further into Asia, Europe, and Australia than the Neanderthals did. Okay, so they were more advanced, they were more adept to their surroundings. Okay. As a distinct group of people, right, we no longer have Cro-Magnon. Right? So it's like your little brother, you can't look at him and be like, you're a Cro-Magnon, right? Because we don't have that. But people today share the same basic characteristics of the Cro-Magnon early humans. So what scientists and historians and anthropologists and archaeologists all believe is that Cro-Magnon continued to adapt and change with the process of evolution and to interbreed with other types of early hominids to what we have today to be the modern man or the modern Homo sapien. Right? So if you look at this image right here, we went from the Neanderthals, your typical like cavemen, and they eventually kind of died out. Then we have the emergence of the Cro-Magnon, smarter, better tools, travel faster. Eventually they begin to adapt and change and kind of fade out as a whole group. And then we enter the modern man or the modern Homo sapien, what you and I are today. Okay, question number 3. How do we know about the Cro-Magnon people? Right? Did we just study their bones? Did we find certain pottery? Did they leave us cave paintings? Or did they write us letters? Okay. How do archaeologists know so much about the Cro-Magnon? What did they find? They found cave paintings. Okay, so early humans developing, moving, growing, becoming modern day humans. How exactly does all that happen besides this whole like scientific stuff with evolution? Well, you and I need 2 things to survive. We need food and we need water. Okay? Water, pretty self-explanatory, right? You go to a stream, you go to a water source. Water, automatic. Food, on the other hand, is a little trickier. If you think back to last year in human geography, you learned about the different types of agricultural revolutions or farming movements that helped progress farming in the modern world today. The first agricultural revolution that you learned about last year is the Neolithic agricultural revolution. And this is the revolution or the food revolution that really kind of kick-started this whole early human expansion. Okay, and we call it the Neolithic agricultural revolution because it occurred during the Neolithic age, or it occurred during the Stone Age. When we're looking at our timelines or our calendars, we're going all the way back to the year 10,000 BCE. So long time ago. Okay. Why did the Neolithic agricultural revolution happen during the Stone Age versus during previous ages? Well, it's because the early humans were getting smarter. Their brains were becoming more developed. They began to utilize the environment around them. They had better tools and they had better weapons. With these tools and these weapons and this increased knowledge, they began to develop agriculture. What happened was you had this woman, and she had a bunch of seeds, and she accidentally scattered them, and then it rained, and from these seeds that she had scattered in the rain, stuff started to grow out of the ground. Okay? Plants started to grow. She thought to herself, hey, if I scatter more seeds and put more water on them, or if it rains again, are more plants going to grow? So she tried it. Guess what? It worked. From there, these early humans began to figure out that when you scatter seeds and you water them, you can grow your own food. Okay? With that, early humans began to shift from a hunting and gathering based society, right? They didn't necessarily need to go off and hunt for all of their food anymore, to a more sedentary, permanent society where you can develop farm fields. They also began to practice the domestication of animals. Okay? Domestication just means the keeping, right? The housing, the herding of cattle, goats, sheep, and pig. So they weren't off chasing wild animals anymore. I mean, they still did that, but that wasn't their primary source of food. Right now they could go to their farm field and pick some barley, right, for some grains, and they could go to their farm pasture, to their cow. They could milk their cow and get some milk and some nutrients. Eventually they could kill their cow to provide meat, things like that. Okay? So they began to create more permanent homes or permanent lifestyles. They didn't need to travel as much or as far or as frequently as they did before. And like I said, this whole shift, so this transition of going from hunting and gathering, following your food source wherever it may leave, to being a more permanent settlement and creating farms is known as the Neolithic Agricultural Revolution. So the first civilizations that really began to develop around the world were in Mesoamerica. Okay, so that's here, right? In like Central America. Then you have the Andean region in South America. You have the Nile River Valley in Egypt and Northern Africa. You have Mesopotamia in the Middle East. You have the Indus River region in the northern part of India. And you have the Yellow River region in China. These are going to be your 6 major civilizations that develop kind of all around the same time period. People in these parts of the world began to figure out that when you spread seeds along fertile soil, right, so it's soil that has some sort of water source, food will grow. And then where food will grow, you can develop a larger permanent settlement. That larger permanent settlement becomes a civilization. Okay, so what are these characteristics of civilization? Well, like I just said, civilizations develop in river valleys. Okay? You need water to grow food. You're not going to be able to scatter seeds in the middle of the desert and expect to have a farm field. Right? It doesn't work that way. We're from Minnesota. Right? You drive 2 miles outside of Cottage Grove, you're going to run into a farm field of some kind, whether it's soybeans, corn, whatever. Right? We are able to grow lots of food here in Minnesota because we have fertile soil. Okay? The rivers are right here, right? Cottage Grove has multiple rivers within a very short period, or like very short distance. So that's our water source, right? And we have the climate, we have the sun. Okay? So these early civilizations develop along the river valleys. Question, oceans, right? Huge water source. Why didn't these early people develop their civilizations along the coast? That's an abundant water source. It never goes away. Well, what does the ocean have that rivers don't have? Answer, salt, right? The ocean's salt water. You can't water your farm field with salt water from the ocean. It'll kill the plants. So you need a fresh water source, right? And that's where your rivers and your lakes come in. So aside from developing their civilizations along their river valleys, along a fresh water source, civilizations also need to have 3 main characteristics. The first is that people need to produce a surplus of food. You need to have extra food. And when we're talking about a civilization, we're talking about a growing population. They're trying to get their cities, their villages, their hamlets, whatever you want to call them, to be larger, right? They're trying to have more babies. In order to have more babies, okay, you need to be able to have enough food to support your new population. So they need to be able to provide extra. These civilizations or these groups of people also need to be able to establish large towns or cities with some sort of government. Somebody has to be in charge. There has to be a person that is making decisions for the whole group. Because if there is no central government, every person is just going to be out for themselves, and it's going to create chaos and civil war, and everybody's going to kill each other. Right? One person or a group of people need to be in charge. You need to have some sort of government. Finally, you need to have a division of labor. Not everybody in a civilization or in a city or a town can all be farmers. I mean, yes, you can all farm, but you need to do other things. Right? Not every single person in that city or town can be a basket weaver. Right? If everybody's a basket weaver, Who's going to be the hunter? Who's going to be off killing the animals to provide the meat, to provide hides for clothing, for shelter? You need to have some group of people that are your defense system, who's protecting your city or your town from outside invaders, right? This process is called a division of labor. People have to have different jobs. Okay? You have to have artisans. These are people that just make things. They create things, whether it's shoes, backpacks, baskets, clothing, anything. Okay? People that create things. And then you need to have traders. Traders are people that take those things that people have made and they go meet with other groups of people in other cities or towns and exchange goods, whether it's for money or other goods. Okay? They're buying and selling. When that happens, you have something that is called cultural diffusion. So my city and then the city next to me or the town next to me, we have now traded our goods. We've learned things about each other. I take the things that I bought from the city next door, I bring them home to my people and I say, hey, look it, they made this type of basket for their tomatoes. Awesome. Maybe we should try to make this type of basket for our tomatoes now. And it's the sharing of knowledge. Additional characteristics of a civilization. So these are things that these early humans also needed in order to grow their cities and their towns and their populations. You need to have a calendar. Okay? Why are calendars important? Well, calendars were important for early humans because they needed to know when the rivers were going to rise, when their fields would flood, and when the rivers would recede, right? When to plant the food, when to harvest the food. Okay? And that goes back to they need to be able to grow more food, excess food. They need to have a surplus. So you need to know when to plant, when to harvest. Okay? They also needed to know about the rivers. Okay? The Nile River was very predictable. People could tell when it was going to rise, when it was going to fall each year, when it was going to flood, when did they need to plant, when did they need to harvest. Not a lot of volatility there. Whereas the Tigris and the Euphrates River were very unpredictable. The people that lived along the Tigris and the Euphrates knew that, so they were more flexible than the people that lived along the Nile. Okay? They had the ability to pick up their cities and their towns and travel as needed depending on where the river was at. These early civilizations also needed some sort of communication. They needed to be able to talk to one another, to get information out to their people. This communication can be in the form of written communication, like physically writing stuff down, or it can be spoken communication, like what you and I are doing right now. Or I should say what I am doing right now. Early written forms of communication that archaeologists have discovered have been hieroglyphics in the Nile River Valley, right? So these are like the little tiles with images on them. Each image represents a word or a phrase. Okay, you all probably know what hieroglyphics are. But then you also have cuneiform. Okay, cuneiform was another symbol-based language that we will learn more about in Unit 1, like tomorrow probably. Yeah. Then what archaeologists discovered eventually was this thing called the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was an actual rock, right, or tablet, and it had multiple sides on it. And on these multiple sides, they had images of hieroglyphics. They had images of cuneiform, right, or these writings of hieroglyphics and cuneiform. They had images of Greek, or writings in Greek, and then they had writings in Latin. Okay? And what archaeologists were able to do is they understood the Greek and the Latin part of things, and they figured out hey, these two things say the same thing in two different languages. I bet these other two languages, the images of the hieroglyphics and then the symbols of the cuneiform, I bet it's the same thing. So archaeologists and historians were able to then translate what the hieroglyphics and the cuneiform said based on the writings that were in Greek and Latin. And that's how we are able to read and understand hieroglyphics and cuneiform today. Okay. Civilizations also began to not just use stone as their main tool source, right? So they moved out of the Stone Age and they moved into the Bronze Age, and then they moved into the Iron Age. So they began to use metal to create tools, right? So they went from having primitive stone-based tools to now more advanced metal tools. This helped them increase their hunting skills. This helped them increase their defense skills, war, farming, pretty much anything and everything. Finally, they have some sort of organized religion. They believe in something. Okay? These early civilizations believe in some sort of higher power that is guiding or directing their life. And this gives them a common belief system. So, question number 4 for you is, which of the following was not a characteristic of the civilization? Okay. So, which one of these things did not lead to a growth in population, a growth in the size of cities? Which one of these things did not lead to you and I sitting here today? Was it that civilizations developed in river valleys, so along freshwater sources? Was it that they created calendars? Was it that their primary food source was through hunting and gathering? So they were a nomadic-based people. They moved from place to place to place to place to place with their food. Or was it that they had some sort of communication? Okay, so again, which one did not lead to you and I sitting here today? Your answer is going to be hunting and gathering food. Right? Early humans went from a nomadic hunting and gathering based society to a more permanent agricultural based society. Right? So when they stopped chasing animals all over the world for their food source, that is when population began to increase and civilizations began to develop. Okay, we have reached the end of our notes. So, what is your assignment at this moment? Your assignment is to answer this summary question. What did you learn about the emergence of civilizations? Okay. What I want to know is, what are the characteristics of a civilization? What are the main 3 things that you need? Okay. Why did people develop civilizations where they did? Okay. So tell me about the characteristics of civilizations. What does every civilization need to be successful?